I hit Erie just before midnight with my headlights cutting through fog that hadn't been there an hour ago. The kind that sits low and wet over the highway and makes you think about pulling over, except you don't, because you're already late and the job's supposed to be simple. One task, one signed form. Then I'd be out. That's what I told myself anyway. The call had come in around 8 that night while I was heating up leftovers in my apartment outside Pittsburgh. Addie Graham from Verizon, after-hours dispatch, her voice clipped and professional the way it always was when she had overflow work nobody else wanted. Microwave relay maintenance at some hut up near the lake. Routine check, swap a failing component, log the serial numbers, get a signature. $400 plus mileage if I could be there by midnight. I said yes before she finished talking. $400 was $400, and I'd spent the last year taking whatever came through. After Molly left and the medical bills for Joyce started piling up, clean contractor work got hard to turn down. Even the overnight stuff, even the drive. Addie emailed the work order while I packed my bag. Standard Verizon template. Address was listed as Presque Isle State Park, Maintenance Road 14, Building C. I'd done a relay hut before, down in Johnstown. Small prefab building, couple racks of equipment, climate control, nothing complicated. Usually you're in and out in 2 hours. I figured this would be the same. The GPS took me north on 79, then west, once I got close to the city. Erie at night looked half deserted. Just a few gas stations still lit up and some bars with cars clustered outside. I stopped for coffee at a Sheetz on Peach Street. The guy behind the counter didn't look up when I paid. Past the city, the road narrowed and the fog got thicker. I could see the lake out to my left, just a dark nothing that went on forever. No moon, no lights except my own. Presque Isle turned out to be this long spit of land that curved out into Lake Erie, all sand and scrub and empty parking lots. During the day, it probably looked nice. Beaches, trails, people with dogs. At midnight, it looked like the edge of something. The maintenance road wasn't marked. I missed it twice before I spotted the turn. Just a gap in the trees with a chain-link gate and a small metal sign that said, "Authorized personnel only." I pulled up and killed the engine. Nobody around. Just the sound of water moving somewhere past the trees and the tick of my engine cooling down. I sat there for a minute, checking my phone. The work order said someone from the city utilities office would meet me at the site to provide access. Some kind of shared jurisdiction thing because the hut sat on park land. I didn't love waiting, but that was the job sometimes. Headlights showed up maybe 5 minutes later. A white Ford Explorer with a city logo on the door, pulling in behind me and stopping with the brights still on. I got out. The woman who stepped out was tall, maybe 5'8", wearing a windbreaker with a city ID clipped to the front. Auburn hair pulled back tight. She didn't smile. "Axel Barnes?" she said. "That's me." She walked up to the gate without offering a handshake, keys already out. "Gail Williams, utilities office. You're late." GPS had trouble with the turn. She didn't respond to that. Just unlocked the gate and swung it open, then stood there waiting while I grabbed my tool bag from the truck. Her headlights threw long shadows across the sand. "Follow the road another quarter mile," she said. "I'll be right behind you." I got back in and drove. The road was barely a road, more like 2 tire ruts through beach grass with the lake close enough that I could hear waves now. The hut appeared pretty quick, sitting by itself in a clearing with nothing else around. Small rectangular building, maybe 12 by 20, painted that generic utility beige. One window with blinds drawn. A single exterior light above the door, throwing yellow across the sand. Lake Erie wrapped around it on 3 sides. I could see the water out past the grass, black and shifting under the fog. I parked and got out. Gail pulled up next to me and cut her engine, but left her headlights on. The beams lit up the front of the hut and made the rest of the clearing feel darker. She walked to the door, unlocked it, and pushed it open. Then she stepped aside. "Go ahead." I walked in and set my bag down on the floor. The inside was what I expected. Concrete floor, metal equipment racks along the back wall, a folding table with a logbook and a radio setup, couple of fluorescent lights overhead. It smelled like dust and old electronics. Cold, but not freezing. There was a space heater in the corner, unplugged. Gail stood in the doorway, watching me. Not moving, just watching. It bugged me a little. I turned and looked at her. Something wrong? No, she said. Just making sure you're set. I'm good. She didn't leave. She stayed there for another few seconds, her eyes moving over the room, over me, like she was checking something off a list in her head. Then she reached into her jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Before I go, she said, you need to read this. She handed it to me. I unfolded it. It was a printed sheet, just text, no logo or header. 5 lines, each one numbered. The font was Courier, the kind you see on old forms that have been photocopied too many times. I read it. 1. Keep one interior light on at all times. 2. If fog reaches the fence line, close all window blinds immediately. 3. If the radio says your name, do not answer. 4. After exactly 3 knocks on the door, go to the breaker panel and flip the main breaker off for 10 seconds, then back on. 5. At 4:04 a.m., do not be standing on the floor. I read it twice. Then I looked up at Gail. What is this? Site protocols, she said. Her voice was flat, professional, like she was telling me where the bathroom was. Protocols for what? For working overnight at this location. I glanced back down at the paper. At 4:04 a.m., do not be standing on the floor. This is a joke, right? No. Then what does it mean? It means follow the instructions, Gail said. Exactly as written. I waited for her to smile, to give me some sign that this was hazing or a prank Verizon pulled on new contractors. She didn't. I need you to read them back to me, she said. Seriously? Yes. I looked at her. She looked back, completely still. I sighed and read them out loud. Keep one interior light on at all times. If fog reaches the fence line, close all window blinds immediately. If the radio says your name, do not answer. After exactly 3 knocks on the door, flip the main breaker off for 10 seconds. At 4:04 a.m., don't be standing on the floor. Gail nodded once. Good. Keep that sheet with you. What happens if I don't? She didn't answer. She just pulled a small notebook from her pocket, wrote something down, date, time, my name probably, then clicked her pen shut and put it away. I'll be back at 6 a.m. to lock up, she said. Don't leave the building before then. Wait. But she was already walking back to her truck. I stepped outside and watched her get in, reverse, and drive back down the road toward the gate. Her taillights disappeared into the fog. And then it was just me. I stood there for a minute holding the paper, listening to the lake. The wind had picked up a little. I could feel it coming in cold off the water. I looked down at the rules again. I folded the paper and shoved it in my jacket pocket. Didn't look at it again. $400 was $400, and I'd driven 2 hours through fog to get here. Whatever Gail's deal was, city liability theater or hazing the night contractor, it didn't change the work order sitting on my tablet. I stepped back inside the hut and let the door swing shut behind me. The fluorescent lights overhead made everything look washed out and institutional. I set my tool bag on the folding table next to the logbook and unzipped it, pulling out my multimeter and the replacement switch Addie had overnighted to my apartment 3 days ago. Still in the anti-static bag, label facing up. Standard Cisco unit, nothing fancy. The equipment cabinet was mounted against the back wall, gray steel with ventilation slots along the sides. I walked over and tested the handle. Unlocked. That was something, at least. I'd done jobs where they gave you the work order but forgot to mention you'd need bolt cutters to actually access the panel. Inside, the cabinet was clean. Cleaner than most I'd seen, actually. No dust buildup on the rack rails. No loose cables zip-tied into chaos by whoever did the last install. Everything was labeled in neat block print on white tape. Power distribution on top, network switch in the middle, microwave relay controller at the bottom. The switch I needed was the middle unit, a 24-port model with a single amber light blinking on the front panel. Fault indicator. Matched the work order. I pulled my phone out to snap a pre-work photo. Standard procedure. Document the setup before you touch anything, then again after. So if someone claims you fried their system, you've got proof it was already half dead when you arrived. The camera opened fine. I took 3 shots from different angles, checked they saved, then slipped the phone back in my pocket and got to work. First step. Confirm it's actually dead. I grabbed my multimeter and tested the switch's power input. Voltage read normal, so the unit was getting power, but not routing traffic. Probably a fried logic board, which meant the swap would fix it or it wouldn't. And either way, I'd be done in under an hour. I powered down the switch using the button on the front panel. The amber light blinked twice, then went dark. Pulled the power cable. Pulled the network trunk lines one by one, 8 cables total, and coiled them on the cabinet floor so they wouldn't tangle. Unscrewed the rack ears. The whole process took maybe 6 minutes. The replacement switch slid into the rails smooth. I tightened the rack ears, plugged the trunk lines back in the same order I'd pulled them, labeled 1 through 8 on the ports, and reconnected power. Hit the button. The unit booted with a green light that cycled to solid after about 30 seconds. Clean swap. Probably. I'd need to wait another few minutes for the routing tables to populate before I could confirm the uplink was actually passing traffic, but it looked good. No error codes on the display. I stepped back and checked my phone for the time, 11:18, and no signal. I stared at the top corner of the screen. No bars, not even one, just a little empty triangle where the carrier logo should have been, and next to it, no service. That was weird. I'd had full signal at the Sheets on Peach Street an hour ago, and again when I'd parked outside the gate. I turned toward the window, the one with the blinds still open, and held my phone up higher. Sometimes metal buildings killed reception if you were standing in the wrong spot. Nothing. The triangle stayed empty. I walked to the door and cracked it open, letting the cold air hit my face. Held the phone outside. Waited 10 seconds. Still no bars. I pulled the phone back in and closed the door. The hut had power. The fluorescent lights were on. The switch was booting fine. And the space heater in the corner was still plugged into the wall even if nobody'd bothered to turn it on. So it wasn't an outage. Just my phone. Except I worked for Verizon. My phone was Verizon. And we had a cell tower maybe 8 miles south on the mainland, plus another one near the park entrance. I shouldn't have lost signal unless both towers went down at the same time, which didn't happen, not without someone sending an alert. I opened my browser anyway, typed in google.com, and watched the loading wheel spin. And spin. And timeout. I tried verizon.com. Same thing. Tried weather.gov because that site loaded on dial-up back in the day and sometimes worked when nothing else did. Nope. Just the spinning wheel, then a gray error page. Unable to connect. Okay. Fine. Maybe the building was a dead zone and I just hadn't noticed before because I'd been busy getting chewed out by Gale. I pulled my tablet out of the tool bag and powered it on. The tablet had its own hotspot, separate from my phone. Contractor-grade unit with a dedicated data plan that worked in basements and subway tunnels and all the other horrible places Verizon sent me to swap hardware. The tablet booted. I opened the browser, tried the same sites. Nothing. Same error, same timeouts. I sat down in the folding chair next to the table and stared at the screen. 2 devices, 2 separate data connections, both dead. That didn't make sense unless the whole cell network had collapsed in the last 10 minutes. And if that were true, the switch I'd just installed wouldn't be booting either because the backhaul ran over the same infrastructure. I looked at the equipment cabinet. The switch's green light blinked steady, no errors. So the network was fine, just my access to it wasn't. I tapped over to the tablet's GPS app. The map loaded. It cached local data so you didn't need a signal to see where you were, but the blue dot that usually showed my location was gone. The whole screen was just blank gray water labeled Lake Erie and a thin line of beige labeled Presque Isle State Park. No roads, no buildings, no markers. I zoomed out. The lake filled the screen, Pennsylvania's coastline, a brown smudge at the bottom. I zoomed back in and tried to center on the park. The map reloaded, and that's when I saw it. Presque Isle looked wrong. The whole peninsula had been simplified, like someone had taken the actual geography, the looping roads, the beaches, the lagoons, and just traced over it with a straight line. One road. That was it. A single route running from the park entrance on the mainland straight out to where the hut sat, then stopping. No loops. No maintenance roads branching off. No parking areas or trails. Just a line ending at a blue dot labeled Building C. The rest of the peninsula was blank. Empty beige space between the lake and the road, no detail at all. I closed the app and reopened it. Same thing. I switched to satellite view. The image didn't load. Just a gray square with a loading icon that spun for 15 seconds before giving up. I set the tablet down on the table and rubbed my eyes. Okay. So my phone was dead. My tablet was half dead. And the map had decided Presque Isle didn't exist anymore except for the one road I'd driven in on. Probably a software glitch. Some update pushed overnight that corrupted the cached maps, or maybe the GPS antenna in the tablet had finally died after 3 years of getting thrown around in my truck. Didn't matter. I still had work to finish. I turned back to the equipment cabinet and pulled up the diagnostic screen on the switch. All ports showed green. Uplink active. Traffic passing. The swap was good. I grabbed the logbook from the table, flipped it open to the first blank line, and wrote down the date, the time, and the serial number from the old switch. Then the new one. Signed my name at the bottom. Done. The whole job had taken maybe 20 minutes. I still had until 6 in the morning before Gail came back. I sat there for a second, staring at the logbook. The previous entries went back months. Different names, different dates, all the same kind of work. Routine maintenance, nothing weird. Nobody had written followed the rules, didn't die in the margins. I closed the book and stood up. My legs felt stiff. The cold was settling into the room now that I wasn't moving, creeping in through the gap under the door and the uninsulated walls. I looked at the space heater in the corner, still unplugged. I could turn it on. Sit here for 5 hours drinking the coffee I'd bought at Sheetz, and trying not to think about the rules folded up in my pocket. Or I could check the perimeter. The hut had a camera system. I'd noticed the monitor sitting on the shelf above the folding table when I first walked in. A little black and white unit with a 4-way split screen. Probably motion activated, set up to catch vandals or kids trying to mess with the equipment. I hadn't bothered looking at it before because I didn't care, but now I had time to kill and nothing else to do. I stepped over to the monitor and tapped the screen. It woke up, showing 4 camera angles in grainy gray feed. Top left, the front of the hut and the clearing where I'd parked. Top right, the fence line to the east. Chain link running into darkness. Bottom left, the back of the hut facing the lake. Bottom right, the west fence, more chain link and beach grass. Everything looked normal, empty. No movement except the grass shifting in the wind. Then I saw the fog. Bottom left camera first. It was rolling in off the lake, low and thick. A solid wall of gray maybe 50 feet out from the hut. Not drifting, not breaking apart into wisps or tendrils. Just moving forward in one uniform sheet, straight and level, like someone had pulled a curtain across the water. I watched it for a few seconds. It didn't slow down. Didn't change direction, just kept coming. The bottom right camera showed the same thing. Fog reaching the west fence now, pressing up against the chain link in a clean horizontal line. No gaps, no variation in density, just a wall. Top right camera. The east fence disappeared as the fog rolled over it. I looked at the top left camera. The clearing was still visible, my truck parked in the middle, but the fog was maybe 20 feet out now and closing. Then it hit the fence line. The paper in my pocket felt heavier. Rule 2. If fog reaches the fence line, close all window blinds immediately. I turned toward the window. The blinds were still open, the glass reflecting the fluorescent lights and my own face staring back. I couldn't see outside, too bright in here, too dark out there. But the fog was at the fence. I just watched it happen. I crossed the room in 4 steps and grabbed the cord hanging next to the window frame, pulled it down. The blinds dropped with a plastic clatter, slats snapping shut one after another until the window was covered. The second the last slat clicked into place, the sound cut out. Not gradually, just gone. The hum of the fluorescent lights overhead, the buzz I hadn't even noticed until now, went silent. The faint rattle of the wind against the walls stopped. The distant rush of the lake disappeared completely. Even the air felt different, like the pressure had dropped or someone had stuffed cotton in my ears. I stood there next to the window, one hand still on the blind cord, and didn't move. The room was totally quiet. I could hear my own breathing. That was it. I stood next to the window for maybe 10 seconds in that total silence. No wind, no lake, no hum from the lights overhead, just my breathing and the faint creak of my jacket when I moved. Then I checked my phone. 12:07 a.m. The Motorola radio on the folding table crackled, static first, clean white noise that cut through the silence sharp enough to make me turn my head. Then a voice came through, male, calm. The kind of tone you hear from someone reading off a form at the DMV or confirming your appointment over the phone. Axel Barnes. I froze. The voice continued. Same even cadence. Axel Barnes. Can you confirm your current location for file update? I didn't move. Rule 3. If the radio says your name, do not answer. My hands went into my jacket pockets. I curled my fingers into fists and kept my mouth shut. The radio crackled again. Just need verbal confirmation for routing purposes. You're logged at Presque Isle Maintenance Road 14, Building C. Is that correct? I stared at the radio. Black plastic casing, antenna extended, green power light steady on the base. It sat there on the table next to the logbook, maybe 4 feet from where I stood. The voice didn't wait long. Also have a note here regarding Joyce Barnes, nursing facility in Dayton, Ohio. We've got an update if you'd like to hear it. My jaw locked. Joyce, my aunt, 78 years old, congestive heart failure and early dementia in a place that cost $3,000 a month. I sent what I could when I could. Last time I called was 2 weeks ago, and she didn't remember my name, but she knew my voice. The radio kept going. Status change logged at 11:43 p.m. tonight. Nothing critical, but you're listed as primary contact, so I figured you'd want the details. I pulled my hands out of my pockets, put them back in. My heart rate kicked up and I could feel it in my chest. Do not answer. I looked at the monitor. 4 cameras. Fog pressed against all sides now, thick and uniform. The front camera showed my truck barely visible through the white wall. No movement, no shapes. The radio voice shifted, not sudden, gradual. The tone changed first, less administrative, more familiar. The pitch went up slightly and the pacing got faster. By the time it spoke again, I recognized it. Molly. Axel, hey, I know you're pissed, but I really need you to pick up. My stomach dropped. It wasn't her. Couldn't be her. But it sounded exactly right. The slight rasp she got when she was tired. The way she clipped the ends of words when she was stressed. There's been an accident on I-90. They're saying it's my car, but I don't... Look, I'm at mile marker 117, and I can't get through to anyone else. Just confirm you got this, okay? I just need to know someone heard me. I bit down hard on the inside of my cheek. Tasted copper. Molly left 6 months ago. Took her stuff from the apartment over a weekend while I was doing a fiber install in Johnstown. She didn't leave a note, just texted me 3 days later saying she needed space and I should stop calling. I hadn't called her in 4 months. The voice on the radio kept going. I can see headlights, but they're not stopping. It's really cold out here and my phone's dead. Axel, please. I know I screwed up, but I wouldn't ask if it wasn't. I turned away from the table, walked to the equipment cabinet, opened it, checked the switch lights, all green, steady. I counted the ports. 8 active, same as before. Behind me, the radio crackled again. Molly's voice, thinner now. Okay, I get it. You don't want to talk to me. That's fine, but if you hear this, can you at least call someone? State police, EMT, I don't care. Just tell them mile marker 117 eastbound. I think there's someone else in the ditch and I can't. I closed the cabinet door, locked it, even though it wasn't locked before. My hands were shaking a little. Do not answer. I kept my mouth shut, pressed my lips together and breathed through my nose and stared at the gray metal cabinet until the voice on the radio finally stopped mid-sentence. The static cut out. Silence dropped back in. I checked my phone. 12:20 a.m. 2 minutes later, something slammed into the door. 3 hits. Fast. Metal on metal, hard enough that the hinges rattled and I heard the deadbolt shift in its housing. The sound punched through the silence, and I flinched so hard I knocked my elbow into the cabinet. Jesus! The echo died. I turned and stared at the door. Solid steel. Painted the same beige as the exterior. No window. No gap underneath. Rule 4. After exactly 3 knocks on the door, go to breaker panel and flip main breaker off for 10 seconds, then back on. I didn't think. Just moved. The breaker panel was mounted on the wall next to the equipment cabinet. Gray metal box 8 inches wide. I yanked it open. Inside were 6 switches labeled in faded marker. Lights, outlets, HVAC, equipment, radio, exterior. At the top was the main breaker, bigger than the others and painted red. I flipped it down. Everything cut out. Fluorescent lights overhead went dark. The hum from the equipment cabinet stopped. The green power light on the radio died. Total blackness except for the faint glow from the security monitor, which must have had a battery backup. I counted. 1, 2, 3. My breathing sounded loud in the dark. 4, 5, 6. I kept my hand on the breaker, metal handle cool under my palm. 7, 8, 9. Something creaked outside. Not the door, farther away. 10. I flipped the breaker back up. The lights buzzed and flickered on. The equipment cabinet hummed. The radio's green light reappeared. Everything steady within 2 seconds. I exhaled and stepped back from the panel. Then I heard it again. Knocking. Not at the door. At the back wall. 3 hits. Same rhythm. Same force. Metal rattling in the frame, even though the back wall was solid concrete with no door, no window, nothing but the exterior camera mount. I turned and stared at the wall. Beige paint. Slight water stain in the top corner. Equipment cabinet blocking most of it. The knocking stopped. I looked at the monitor. Bottom left camera showed the back of the hut. Fog pressed right up against the wall, so thick I couldn't see the lake or the beach grass or anything past 3 feet. No shapes, no movement. But whatever knocked at the front door was now at the back. I didn't hear footsteps. Didn't hear anything crossing the sand or gravel or concrete pad outside. It just moved, relocated. Like distance didn't matter, or it didn't need to travel the space between. I pulled the folded paper out of my pocket. Gale's rules. I read them again under the fluorescent light. Rule 4 didn't say the knocking would stop, just said flip the breaker. I did that. Followed it exactly. The rules weren't about making things go away. They were about surviving contact. That was it. That's what clicked. These weren't safety protocols or maintenance guidelines or some weird liability thing Verizon cooked up. They were instructions for staying alive in a place where something else existed. Something that knew my name, knew Joyce, knew Molly's voice well enough to fake it. I folded the paper and put it back in my pocket. 4 more hours until Gail came back at 6 a.m. I checked the monitor again. All 4 cameras showed nothing but fog and the faint outline of the hut itself. My truck was completely gone from view on the front camera. The knocking didn't come back. I stood there next to the breaker panel with my hand still on the open metal door, listening to the fluorescent lights hum and the silence underneath. I needed to talk to someone real. The landline sat on the folding table next to the radio. Black plastic, single-line push buttons yellowed from age. I picked up the receiver and got a dial tone immediately. No static, just clean tone humming in my ear. I dialed Addie's number from memory. She'd made me memorize it 2 years ago when I started taking after-hours calls. Said texting wasn't reliable past 10 p.m., and she didn't want excuses. It rang twice. "Graham." Her voice came through sharp and clear. No distortion, no delay. "It's Axel," I said. "Barnes, at the Presque Isle site." "I know who you are." She didn't sound surprised. "You're supposed to be working." "I am." I swapped the switch, logged the serials. I turned toward the window with the closed blinds. But the woman from City Utilities gave me a sheet of paper. 5 rules. She said I had to follow them. Silence on the other end. Not dead air. I could hear her breathing. "Addie, I'm here. Is this real?" Another pause. Longer this time. I heard her chair creak. The sound of her shifting weight. "Yes." My stomach dropped. I'd wanted her to laugh, to tell me Gail was hazing contractors or running some weird Park Service tradition. Anything normal. "What do you mean, yes?" "I mean the sheet is real. The rules are real." Her tone didn't change. Same flat supervisor voice she used for pay disputes. "You read them back to her?" "Yeah." "Good. Then you know what to do." I pulled the folded paper from my pocket and stared at it. The text looked even worse under the fluorescent lights. Too clean, too precise. "Addie, what is this place?" "It's a microwave relay station on park land with shared jurisdiction." She recited it the same way she'd read me the work order 6 hours ago. "You accepted the job. You're on site. The equipment's fixed. Now you follow the protocols until your shift ends at 6 a.m. These aren't protocols. They're exactly what you need to survive the night." She cut me off, not angry, just factual. "Treat them like physics, Axel. You don't argue with gravity. You don't test whether fire burns. You follow the rules and you see daylight." I sat down hard on the folding chair. It scraped against concrete. "You knew," I said, "when you called me. You knew what this was." "I knew it paid $400 plus mileage for 6 hours of work." Her voice stayed level, professional. "I knew you needed the money. I knew you'd say yes." She wasn't wrong. I had Joyce's bills, I had rent, I had the truck payment coming up in 8 days. "Listen to me." Addie's tone shifted, still controlled, but something underneath it now. Something harder. "If the rules ever seem to update, if anyone tries to give you a new version, a revised copy, anything, the paper in your hand right now is the only one that matters. You understand?" I looked down at the sheet. 5 lines. Courier font. Photocopied edges. Why would they update? They won't. Not if you're smart. She exhaled. But people get confused out there. They hear things. See things. Start second-guessing what they read. That's when they make mistakes. "What kind of mistakes?" "The kind that mean I have to find a new contractor." She said it flat. No emotion. "Paper copy. 5 rules, nothing else. Are we clear? Yeah. Good. Finish your shift. Gail will be there at 6. The line went dead. I set the receiver down and stared at the paper for another 30 seconds. My hands weren't shaking anymore. That bothered me. I should have been panicking. Should have been throwing tools in my bag and running for the truck. Instead, I just sat there trying to reframe it. Treat it like policy, like safety regulations or building codes. Don't stand under a suspended load. Don't bypass the breaker. Don't answer the radio. Just rules, but my brain wouldn't buy it. Because policies don't warn you about fog. They don't tell you when to stand or not stand on the floor. They don't assume something will knock. I folded the paper again and put it back in my pocket. Then I stood up and grabbed my tool bag. I didn't decide to leave, not consciously, but my hands packed the multimeter back into the bag, zipped the side pocket, slung the strap over my shoulder. The confirmation from Addie made it worse somehow. If she'd laughed, I could have stayed. Could have written it off as local weirdness and finished the shift, but she'd confirmed it. Told me to treat the rules like physics. That meant testing them while I still could. I crossed to the door in 4 steps. My hand went to the deadbolt. Solid steel, heavy duty, the kind you'd use on a commercial freezer or a vault. I turned it and heard the bolt slide free, pulled the door open. Cold air hit my face immediately. Not wind, just cold, dense and still. The fog pressed right up to the threshold, white wall. No movement, no wisps or tendrils, just solid white from ground to maybe 7 feet up where it stopped in a clean horizontal line. I could see my truck 15 feet ahead, taillights barely visible through the white. The clearing looked the same. Sand and beach grass. Normal. I stepped out onto the sand with my head down. Didn't look toward the fence. Didn't look at the fog. Just watched my boots in the ground 3 feet ahead. 1 step. 2. 3. My tool bag swung against my hip. The cold worked through my jacket. I kept my breathing steady and my eyes down. 4 steps. 5. The sand looked right, pale gray. Tire ruts from my truck and Gail's Explorer cutting diagonal lines. Small stones scattered near the foundation. 6 steps. My boot hit something solid. Not a rock, not driftwood. I stopped. The ground didn't feel like ground. It felt flat, rigid, like I'd stepped off pavement onto tile. I crouched slow and brushed my hand across the surface. Grit came away under my palm. Sand. But underneath it, wood, varnished wood. I pulled my flashlight from my belt and clicked it on. The beam cut through the fog about 2 feet before scattering into nothing. But down at my boots, the light showed seams, straight lines running parallel, deck planks. Not weathered, not rotted, clean varnish, smooth finish. I brushed more sand away with my hand. The planks ran in neat rows, segmented, fitted tight with no gaps. I'd poured a concrete pad for a deck last summer in Monroeville. Composite boards, galvanized screws. This looked professional. Better than professional. I pressed my palm flat against the wood. It flexed. Not much, just a slight give, like pressing on a gym mat. I moved the flashlight beam 6 inches to the left and the plank shifted again, not bending, not warping, responding, like muscle under skin. I yanked my hand back and stood up fast. My tool bag swung hard and I stumbled 1 step forward. My other boot hit wood, both feet on it now. The surface rippled, not a wave, not vibration. It moved the way flesh moves when you press a bruise. Pressure redistribution, internal. I turned and ran, 3 steps back toward the hut, 4, 5. My boots hit sand again, and I didn't stop. Just kept moving until my shoulder slammed into the doorframe and I grabbed the edge with both hands. I threw myself inside and kicked the door shut behind me. The deadbolt. I turned it hard, heard the bolt slam home. Then I backed up until my shoulders hit the equipment cabinet, and I stood there breathing hard with my tool bag still on my shoulder and my flashlight still in my hand. The rules weren't instructions. They were containment. Something was outside. Something that had replaced the ground with a surface that flexed and responded and pretended to be sand until you got close enough to notice. And the hut wasn't a relay station. It was a cage. I just didn't know yet if it was built to keep something out or keep me in. The radio crackled. I was still standing against the equipment cabinet, breathing too hard, tool bag still on my shoulder. I'd locked the door, bolted it. My flashlight was in my hand, and I couldn't remember why. The static smoothed out, and Addie's voice came through, clean, professional. Same tone she used when she called me about the job. "Axel," she said, "you're doing fine." I stared at the radio, black plastic Motorola on the table. Same green power light, same coiled cord attached to the handset sitting in its cradle. The speaker grill was dusty. "I know you're scared," Addie's voice said. "That's normal. But leaving is allowed if you follow the rules perfectly." I didn't move. My shoulder blades were pressed against the metal cabinet, and I could feel the vibration from the switch inside, the hum of active ports. "Let me read them back to you," the radio said. "So you're sure." I pulled the folded paper from my pocket, unfolded it. The 5 rules were there in courier font, same as before. I kept my eyes on the page. "Rule 1, Addie's voice said. "Keep one interior light on at all times." I looked at the fluorescent fixture overhead. Both tubes were lit, buzzing faint but steady. "Rule 2, if fog reaches the fence line, close all window blinds immediately." I glanced at the window. Blinds down. Slats shut tight. "Rule 3, if the radio says your name, do not answer." My jaw tightened. The radio kept going. "Rule 4, after exactly 3 knocks on the door, go to the breaker panel and open the door so pressure can equalize." I looked down at the paper in my hand. Rule 4 said, after exactly 3 knocks on the door, go to breaker panel and flip main breaker off for 10 seconds, then back on. Nothing about opening the door, nothing about pressure. "Rule 5, the radio continued, at 4:04 a.m., do not be standing on the floor." That one matched, word for word. "You see?" Addie's voice said. "Follow them perfectly, and you can leave. You'll be fine." I folded the paper and put it back in my pocket, kept my mouth shut. The radio went quiet, then cut to static, then died completely. I set my tool bag on the floor and checked the time on my phone. 1:32 a.m. Still no signal. Battery at 68%. I crossed to the table and sat down in the folding chair facing the monitor. 4 camera feeds, all showing fog pressed tight against the hut. My truck was barely visible on the front camera, just the outline of the bed and the edge of the cab through the white. That's when I noticed the floor. Water was coming up between the tiles. Not pouring, not flooding, just seeping. Thin lines of it, dark and cold-looking, spreading slow from the seams near the back wall. I stood up and stepped back. The lines widened, became puddles. Small ones, maybe the size of my palm, scattered across the concrete in no pattern I could see. The water didn't reflect the overhead lights. It looked flat, matte. I grabbed a rag from my tool bag and crouched next to the nearest puddle, pressed the rag against it. The cloth soaked through in 2 seconds, cold enough I felt it through the fabric. I lifted the rag, and the puddle was still there, same size, like I hadn't touched it at all. I dropped the rag, stood up, back toward the table. The puddles spread, slow but steady. They didn't run or pool toward low spots. They just expanded outward in clean circles, meeting each other and merging into larger shapes that stayed perfectly still on the surface. I checked the monitor again. Bottom left camera, back of the hut. Fog pressed against the wall, dense and unmoving. But inside the fog, maybe 10 feet out, I saw something. A shape. Thin and vertical. Bent slightly at the top, then straightening. Like a pole being lifted and set down. Then another one, farther left. Same motion. Lifting. Setting down. I counted 4 of them. Maybe 5. They didn't move forward or back, just up and down, slow and deliberate, like something was testing the ground. The hut felt smaller. The air wasn't moving. I could smell the dust and old electronics, same as before. But now there was something else underneath. Wet concrete. Lake water. Something mineral. I turned away from the monitor and looked at my tool bag on the floor. The multimeter inside, the old switch in its anti-static bag, my tablet. All of it packed and zipped and ready to go because some part of me had thought I could just walk out and drive away and pretend this was a normal job. The switch swap didn't matter anymore. I knew that. $400 didn't matter. Addie's approval didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was lasting until 6 a.m., when Gail came back. I unzipped the bag anyway, pulled out the multimeter and set it on the table. Pulled out the old switch and stacked it next to the logbook. Pulled out my tablet and powered it off completely, then put it back in the bag. I zipped the bag shut and set it under the table, out of the water. My hands were steady. That still bothered me. I sat back down and checked my phone. 2:18 a.m. I'd lost 46 minutes somewhere. Packing the bag hadn't taken that long. Looking at the puddles hadn't taken that long. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. I focused on that. Consistent sound. Proof the breaker was still on. The power was still flowing. Rule 1 was still intact. The puddles had reached the table legs. Water touching metal. I watched the line creep up the leg about half an inch, then stop. It didn't drip. Didn't run back down. Just held there. I pulled my boots up onto the chair rung and sat with my knees bent, feet off the floor. 3:40 a.m. I didn't check my phone that time. I just knew. The way you know when someone's watching you, or when you're about to be late, or when something's wrong. The breaker box clacked. I turned fast. The gray metal panel on the wall, door closed, same as I'd left it after flipping the main breaker earlier. Another clack, metal on metal. Deliberate. I stood up, left my tool bag under the table, crossed to the panel in 4 steps. The puddles had spread wider now. I had to step over 2 of them. I grabbed the panel door and pulled it open. The main breaker was moving. Not flipped yet, but lifting. Slow. The red-painted handle rising from the down position toward the center. Smooth and controlled like someone was working it from inside the box. I put my hand on it and shoved it back down. It pushed back. Not hard, not violent. Just steady upward pressure, constant and patient like a hydraulic press. I pressed harder. Used both hands. Wrapped my fingers around the handle and leaned my weight into it, forcing the breaker down into the on position. The fluorescent lights flickered once, steadied. The pressure didn't stop. I could feel it through the handle, through the metal, through my palms. Something on the other side pushing up while I pushed down. My forearms started shaking. Not from fear, from the effort. I locked my elbows and shifted my weight, planting my boots wide to get better leverage. The lights flickered again. I didn't let go. The breaker wanted to lift, needed to lift. If it flipped off, the lights would die. If the lights died, Rule 1 was broken. I didn't know what happened after that. Didn't want to know. I held it down and my shoulders burned and my hands cramped and I kept the lamp alive by force. I held the breaker down with both hands, shoulders burning, until 3:58 a.m. I know because I checked my phone with my chin while keeping both palms locked around the handle. The pressure against the breaker never stopped, just constant upward force, patient and steady like something on the other side had all the time in the world. Then the knocking started again. Not at the door this time. at the back wall. 3 hard hits, metal on metal, same rhythm as before. I kept my hands on the breaker. Didn't move. Rule 4 said after exactly 3 knocks, flip the main breaker off for 10 seconds, then back on. I'd already done it once. Figured I'd do it again. But the knocking didn't stop at 3. A 4th knock came. Then a 5th, moving left along the back wall toward the corner. The impacts traveled in a slow circle around the hut, deliberate and methodical, hitting every few feet. Testing seams. Testing corners. I heard one at the back left corner, then the side wall, then closer to the door. The sound wasn't random. It was searching. I let go of the breaker. The handle stayed down. The upward pressure was gone. I stepped back and watched the breaker for 5 seconds. It didn't move. Whatever had been pushing it had stopped. The knocking continued. 7th hit, 8th, circling toward the front. I crossed to the breaker panel again, put my hand on the main breaker, and flipped it down. The lights died. The equipment hum cut out. Total darkness except for the faint green glow from the security monitor running on backup battery. I counted to 10 in my head, slower than I should have. My hands were shaking again. At 8 seconds, something scraped across the roof. Not wind, not a branch. Metal on metal, dragging from the front edge toward the back in one long, continuous scrape that lasted 3 seconds and sounded like a blade being pulled across sheet steel. The floor tilted. Just a degree or two. Enough that I felt my weight shift forward and had to step back to catch myself. The hut rocked gently, then settled, like something underneath had nudged it to see if it would float. I flipped the breaker back up at 10 seconds. The lights buzzed and flickered on. The equipment cabinet hummed. The radio's green power light reappeared. The scraping stopped. The floor leveled out. I stepped back from the panel and checked the monitor. All 4 cameras showed fog pressed tight against the hut. No shapes, no movement. Just white. My phone said 4:01 a.m. I looked at the floor. The puddles were moving, not spreading anymore. Flowing. The water ran across the tiles in thin sheets, all of it heading toward the back wall in a slow, deliberate current. It pooled near the equipment cabinet, then slid under the metal legs and kept going toward the corner. Rule 5. At 4:04 a.m., do not be standing on the floor. I had 3 minutes. I turned and looked at the ceiling. The cable tray ran along the center of the room about 7 feet up, mounted to the ceiling with metal brackets every 4 feet. It was steel mesh, 12 inches wide, holding bundled network cables and power lines. Looked solid, probably rated for 50 pounds. I grabbed the rolling office chair from the table, dragged it across the floor, and positioned it under the cable tray near the front of the room. The wheels caught on the edge of a puddle, and I had to kick them free. Water soaked into my right boot. I climbed onto the chair. It rolled an inch, and I grabbed the edge of the folding table to steady myself. The table scraped across the floor, but held. I reached up and grabbed the cable tray with both hands. Cold metal. Rough mesh that bit into my palms. I pulled myself up, got my elbows over the edge, locked my arms around the tray, and hauled my legs off the chair. My boots swung free. I hooked my right ankle over the tray and pulled my left knee up, wedging it against the frame. The tray sagged but didn't break. I hung there with my arms locked around the metal, chest pressed against the cables, feet off the floor. My shoulders started cramping immediately. I shifted my weight and got my left boot onto the frame, then pulled my right knee up. Better, more stable. I could hold this for a few minutes. My phone said 4:03 a.m. The water below me covered the entire floor now. No more puddles. Just a thin sheet running from wall to wall, flowing toward the back in smooth ripples. It didn't look deep, maybe a 1/4 inch. But it moved with purpose, like it was being pulled. The radio crackled. I didn't look at it. kept my eyes on the floor. 4:04 a.m. The tiles split. Not all at once, just one tile near the back wall, right below the equipment cabinet. It cracked down the center with a soft pop, and the two halves peeled back like skin. Dark water welled up from underneath, thick and black, not lake water. It smelled like mud and salt, and something I didn't have a name for. Something pushed up through the gap. A broad, slick back, curved, dark gray or black, hard to tell in the fluorescent light. It rose slowly, displacing water that ran off its surface in sheets. The back was smooth and wet, no scales, no texture I could see, just a wide expanse of muscle pushing up like a massive body trying to stand. The hut shook, not a tilt this time. A full shake, side to side, hard enough that the cable tray swung and I had to tighten my grip to keep from falling. The equipment cabinet rattled. The folding table slid 6 inches toward the door. The blinds over the window bowed inward. Not from wind, from pressure. The slats bent in the middle, curving toward the room like something outside was leaning against them. The door bulged. The steel door, solid and heavy, pushed inward at the center. The deadbolt held, but the frame creaked. The hinges groaned. I watched the door bend another inch, then stop. The radio crackled again. Gail's voice came through. Calm. Professional. Same flat tone she'd used when handing me the rules. Axel, the gate's open. I'm outside. You can come out now if you need to. I didn't answer. Rule 3. If the radio says your name, do not answer. I know it's difficult in there, Gail's voice continued, but you don't have to stay. Just come down off the tray and open the door. I'll guide you out. It's safe now. I looked at the door, still bulging inward, still creaking. I pulled the folded paper from my jacket pocket with my right hand, keeping my left arm locked around the cable tray. I unfolded it against my chest and read Rule 5 again. At 4:04 a.m., do not be standing on the floor. Didn't say anything about coming down after, didn't say when it was safe. I folded the paper and put it back in my pocket. Gail's voice kept talking. The water's receding, Axel. You can see it from here. Just step down and walk to the door. I'll have you out in 30 seconds. I looked at the floor. The water wasn't receding. It was rising. The black water from the split tile had spread across the room, mixing with the thin sheet that had been there before. It was maybe 2 inches deep now. The broad, slick back had sunk below the surface, but I could see its shape moving underneath, slow and deliberate. The overhead lights flickered, just once. A half-second dip, then they came back steady. I looked at the breaker panel on the wall. The main breaker was still in the on position. The upward pressure was back. I could see the handle trembling, vibrating slightly, like something was working it from inside. The lights flickered again, longer this time. 2 seconds of darkness before they buzzed back on. I made a decision. I shifted my weight on the cable tray, got my left boot wedged solid against the frame, and reached down toward the breaker panel with my right hand. Couldn't reach it. Too far. I unwrapped my right arm from the tray and leaned down, stretching as far as I could while keeping my left arm and both legs locked around the metal. My fingertips brushed the panel door. Not enough. I shifted again, hooking my left ankle tighter around the frame, and leaned farther. My right hand closed around the panel door handle. I pulled it open. The main breaker handle was moving upward, slow, smooth, same hydraulic pressure as before. I reached inside the panel and grabbed the feed line. Thick insulated cable, warm to the touch. I wrapped my fingers around it and pulled. It didn't budge. I pulled harder, bracing my left arm against the cable tray and using my whole body weight. The cable shifted 1/2 inch. I heard something crack inside the panel. I yanked again. The feed line ripped free from its housing with a sharp metallic snap and a spray of sparks that burned my knuckles. The lights died. Total darkness. No flicker. No hum. No green glow from the monitor. The backup battery must have died while I wasn't looking. The door stopped creaking. The pressure around the hut vanished. I felt it lift, sudden and complete, like a weight had been removed from all sides at once. The shaking stopped. The blind stopped bowing. The floor leveled out. In the black, I heard water settle. A soft slosh, then stillness. Then I heard the heavy body slide away toward the back wall, scraping, dragging, moving slow and deliberate across the tiles until the sound faded and disappeared. I stayed on the cable tray. My arms were cramping, my shoulders burned. My right hand throbbed where the sparks had hit. I didn't move. I counted to 60 in my head. Then I counted again. Then I stopped counting and just hung there in the dark, listening. Nothing. No water. No scraping. No knocking. No radio. I stayed off the floor. Time passed. I don't know how long. My phone was in my pocket, but I didn't want to let go of the tray to check it. Eventually, gray light started leaking around the edges of the blinds. Not much, just enough to see the outline of the window frame and the shape of the door. I waited until the gray turned pale yellow. Dawn. I unwrapped my legs from the cable tray and let my boots drop. They hit solid floor. No water, no splash. I let go with my left arm and hung by my right for a second, then dropped the rest of the way. My knees buckled when I landed, but I caught myself against the table. I stood up straight and looked at the floor. Dry. Solid. No puddles, no cracks. The tiles were beige and intact, same as when I'd arrived. I crouched and ran my hand across the tile where the split had been. Smooth. No seam. No gap. I stood and crossed to the door, turned the deadbolt. It slid free with no resistance. I pulled the door open. Cold air hit my face. Clean, fresh, no fog. The clearing looked normal. Sand and beach grass. My truck 15 feet out, covered in dew but intact. The fence line visible in the distance, chain link and posts. Lake Erie beyond, gray and calm under the early light. I stepped outside. My boots hit sand. It shifted under my weight. Normal sand. I crouched and brushed my hand across it. Grit and shells and small stones. No wood, no varnish, just sand. The air smelled like lake water and wet grass and nothing else. I pulled out my phone. 5:43 a.m., full signal, 4 bars. I opened the map app. The blue dot appeared immediately, centered on Presque Isle State Park. I zoomed in. The peninsula showed roads, trails, parking areas, the lighthouse, the beach. Everything. Normal. I stood and walked back into the hut. The equipment cabinet was still humming. The switch I'd installed was still running. Green lights steady across all 8 ports. The breaker panel hung open with the feed line dangling loose, copper wire exposed and scorched black at the end. I grabbed my tool bag from under the table, slung it over my shoulder, and walked back outside. At 6:08 a.m., I heard an engine. Gail's white Ford Explorer came down the maintenance road and pulled into the clearing, parking next to my truck. She got out, wearing the same city windbreaker and ID lanyard. She didn't look tired, didn't look surprised. She walked to the hut, stopped at the door, and looked inside. Her eyes went to the breaker panel. She pulled a small notebook from her pocket, clicked her pen, and wrote something. 3 lines. Then she looked at me. "You're finished," she said. I nodded. She stepped inside, crossed to the folding table, and picked up the logbook. Flipped through it, set it back down. Then she walked to the breaker panel and examined the damaged feed line without touching it. "This'll need repair," she said. Flat. Professional. No blame in her voice. "Yeah," I said. She turned and walked past me out the door. I followed. "Load your tools," she said. "I'll lock up." I went to my truck, opened the passenger door, and set my tool bag on the seat. Then I walked back to the hut. Gail was standing in the doorway with the logbook in her hand. "Job's incomplete," she said. Equipment swapped, but the site's not functional. You understand that? Yeah. She closed the logbook and tucked it under her arm. You can go. I got in my truck, started the engine, and pulled out of the clearing. Gail stood by her Explorer and watched me leave. I drove back down the maintenance road, through the open gate, onto the main park road and out to the highway. I didn't stop at the Sheets. Didn't stop at all. I got on I-90 and drove straight west with the lake on my right and the sun coming up behind me. The job was incomplete. The equipment was swapped, but the power was dead. Verizon wouldn't pay me the full $400. Probably wouldn't pay me at all. But I had the rule sheet in my pocket, and I was leaving Erie behind. That was enough.